Well, thank you everybody for being here. My name is Tish Melody. I am the panel coordinator for the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival. I have my partner in crime, Violet, here with me as well. So we are going to be talking about Afrofuturism and diversity in sci-fi, particularly from the lens of Afrofuturism. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa Simmons. She's going to introduce herself and introduce our panelists today. But thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning into this panel. And I'm excited to hear this conversation today. So I'm gonna let it go.
Thanks, Tishna. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here at SciFi again. Such an amazing festival. And we are joined today by Louise-Julie and Daniel Callahan, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but I think mainly what we're going to be focusing on is Afrofuturism, but also on, the much anticipated feature-length film Yohance, and we're going to talk a little bit about the name and the pronunciation of that name, which I got wrong to begin with. But I just want to welcome you both here, incredible artists. You are both so multi-talented. I don't even know where to begin about the work. And we're going to talk with Daniel too. He just had a film at Roxbury International Film Festival that won an award and is now winning awards in other film festivals. And Daniel comes to us from many different spaces and places, but one of them is this whole concept around masking, which we're going to get into too. But we want to talk with both Paul and Daniel about their work, about the importance of diversity and what that means in Afrofuturism and what that means to them. So I want to start out actually with you, Paul, and you come from a fine arts background, right? And so here, you're learning about Monet and Rodin and all of these incredible masters, and you're at the point now where you're doing graphic novels. So can you talk a little bit about that? Moving from that fine art to graphic novels, and then who were you influenced by in the art world?
The that's a pretty loaded question. It's no, it's great, but yeah, actually, growing up in France was a huge influence on my art style in general, just my approach to art and art appreciation in general. I'm not saying that we don't have that in the States, but growing up in France, it's something being in the same country and having, like almost every city has a museum that has the authentic art. So just like you said, of Rodin and Monet and Manet and, all these different people. So you get to see their works in progress and their work and then understand they've had much more time with these works to understand the approach. And the interesting thing is that even then, there's this French sensitivity to detail and sensuality and making sure everything's tactile. Like that's one of the things that people love about Rodin or Clément Claudel as well, which was his understudy, but was actually better than him. Was this textural, primal approach to sculpting that just by your eyes you're feeling the sculpture with your eyes, and that was very important to me, but also studying Monet as well, where you see like the impressionistic movement and how you don't have to get all the fine lines in there, but make sure that you just capture the essence of something. And so that was what I got from the French, French heritage and being from there. But then applying that to what I learned at the same time, my parents were they had their business in Africa for the past 40 years. So we traveled to Africa frequently, and having that connection to the continent, understanding, where my ancestors, or at least like the majority of my ancestors came from, and having that inform my identity, this melange, if you will, of both of those sensitivities created this need for me to find some way to express that. So even long before I decided to go on the journey of Yohance and creating these graphic novels and everything, I already knew that if I was going to do it, that was my artistic background. So I didn't get into comic books or graphic novels until much later on, until I went to college. And the reason for it was because originally I always wanted to do film, and just like just like all these other art forms in France, film actually originated in France. The Lumière brothers. So they take a lot of pride in that. So even at a very young age, as kids, we're learning film as well. So that was my primary language of how to communicate, all these stories I had in my mind as I wanted to do. But obviously, when you want to make something that's in the world of fantasy and that big, that's when you have to get, the big budget of Hollywood and whatnot, like George Lucas and all, and it's very hard to do that, to fathom how you're going to do that when you're just a kid that has all these ideas. But things that the ideas were fully formed in my head, and I didn't want to wait until I had like the budget of Hollywood to be able to do something like that. So that was until I got to college I realized that if I can't make a film, so what's the next best thing? Then I went back to when I was in France. The culture of comic books and graphic novel, they call bande dessinée, is they consider it to be the ninth art. So you have like the 9 different types of fine art, painting and sculpture, film and so on, theater and so on, and they actually hold comic books to be on that same level. And that was a very different approach to the at the time the American approach, which was this is for superheroes and kids and whatnot. And over there, it's like, no, this is just a film on paper. So I'm like, well, that's the way I'm going to do it. Let me go ahead and do that. Get my films out, on paper, if you will. And then after that, I'll figure out how to make it happen, how to make it work after that. And the rest is history. So that's how that whole, journey came to be.
Wow, that is so incredible. And it's so funny because we here in the US are so focused on like, well, this is how it's done and this is what graphic novels are and it's superheroes and it's when you look at the plethora of graphic novels that are out there, you realize that that's not the case. It's really it's about the importance of storytelling. And I want to get back to some of the things you were saying, but I want to bring Daniel in here really quickly too to talk about Daniel, you have a lot of similarities. You also were studying fine arts. You just came, you made your first film, Come On In, which is your first film. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that same sort of like going from fine art to understanding that maybe the best vision, that the best medium for you to tell your stories was through film, and then to use that sort of like art and transformation with your masking techniques. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've kind of been all over the place in terms of mediums. I think, it started, I started kind of with my fascination with storytelling in film in terms of being just a consumer of films. So I grew up watching everything from, Star Wars to Jurassic Park and all these films that were about large worlds and had such an incredible facility with technology that it allowed them to create those worlds. But I went into school really for animation. So it's interesting sort of hearing Paul's story because mine was kind of in reverse. I started with drawing and with animating, and then I moved actually into music. And I was really heavy into music, and I was making a lot of music. Worked with several artists like Jidenna and Janelle Monáe, and really kind of that was my introduction to this idea of Afrofuturism. Really before I knew it, and out of the music scene, I felt like we shot a few music videos, and I was really fascinated with how they were doing that, like how they were capturing us, and I wanted to figure out what it was like on the other side of that camera. And so when I came back to Boston, I went to Emerson and studied film there for my MFA degree, and I kind of renewed my sort of love for film. But I think with all these things, like media to me is sort of secondary. Because I wasn't so much like trained from birth in sort of art making, I didn't really pick up those notions that you had to choose one form over the other. It was really like, well, what do you want to do? And then you figure out the mediums that make sense after the vision. And so these visions would come to my head, and then it was just a matter of understanding and figuring out the skills to then make those visions real. And I found that once I kind of picked up the skills on one end, I really drew for a very long time. And I realized that, well, drawing isn't all that different from, painting, and painting's not all that different from filmmaking. you're creating frames of images, and with filmmaking, you're just creating a bunch of them. And then animation was very much like my bridge between drawing and filmmaking, where it's, you're drawing all the frames to make this sort of illusion of motion. And then when I found out that I could just skip that whole process of drawing every frame, I was like, bet, that is much more efficient. So but the what it taught me was having an appreciation for every single frame being important, right? Because as an animator, especially if you're doing 2D animation the traditional way, you are drawing every frame. And so that level of detail and that level of consideration is definitely what carried over to film. And I highly recommend folks who want to get into film to get into animation first, because I think it does teach you to have that sort of respect for timing and for the work that every frame needs to do for your film. So all that kind of brought me to filmmaking, but in the process, in terms of my artwork, when we talk about the masking work, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit, but that was very much about sort of reclaiming. And I think what Afrofuturism is at its core is this sort of reclaiming that is happening in Black consciousness, and this sort of reconnection to our root, which was obviously severed. We are all sort of the product of this giant severance of people. And when we talk about Afrofuturism, it's really an interesting concept, and it's an interesting even origin, because Afrofuturism is something that, as a word, came up in America, and it was coined by actually a white man, and the notion that the notion of science fiction, I think, is so interesting from a Black lens, because as Black people, I feel like we are the most science fiction people on the planet, because our story actually is science fiction, right? When you think of Star Wars and you think of the Empire, there's this empire that enslaves people and brings them to like new worlds. When we think of space travel, we think of world travel. Africans actually went through that experience of being abducted by aliens, brought to a new world, subjected to slavery, and having to fight a resistance to free themselves. And so the African consciousness, especially the Black consciousness in terms of, the diaspora, how we've been spread around the world, is a story of Afrofuturism. It's a story of science fiction. So reclaiming that, and also building upon that sort of ethos is really what I think Afrofuturism is about. And what artwork is about for me, it's about finding my own humanity, being able to express that humanity to others, and then being able to understand others' humanity through that process.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, and it's so true, and it is so deep, what you said and how we talk about Afrofuturism, and then the importance of storytelling and the importance of telling our stories. So there's a lot to unpack in what you just went over, and I want to bring Paul back into this discussion about imagery, about your graphic novels, about the amazing animation of all of your work that you've done with the Pack and now Yohance and other things to come, and about the importance of the characters you have chosen in your animation that are bringing to life a world that is our future, our past, our present, but creating characters, both of you, creating characters that are empowered. And why is that really important? And how come you use this type of medium, animation, and the sort of like Afrofuture to help tell that story?
First, before I even get into that, like I really like what Daniel said about Afrofuturism, because it's and I just wanted to address it too, because my own I think every Black creator that is familiar with that term has their own definition of that word, and they're not necessarily wrong, either one of them. I think that's what's really cool about it, because I remember when I first heard the term, there was a very clear definition of what that meant for me, but that wasn't necessarily the same for other people. But then when I got to hear the other point of view, I'm like, oh, well, you're not wrong. It's just that because we come from multiple peoples that were torn from the continent, and then put into in the middle passage, purge at least 2/3 of them that even make it, and then the survivors that survive that horrific experience I mean, for one thing, to survive that is dehumanizing, and then have to go through like further dehumanization, reduce down the chattel, and then to have your culture stripped away from you, but still have your intelligence and the complexities of the cultures you came from still come through in your children and their children without even realizing it. I mean, I was shocked when I first saw how blues music was directly linked to Mandinka Bambara music, and the complex string theory that goes along with it, and this just came naturally with it. So these things are coded in the blood. It's in the DNA. So when people think Afrofuturism, for some people they're like, look, I just want to reclaim that. I want to reclaim that, just like them, to reclaim that severance, because there's so much history, thousands of years that happened before that point that we were ripped away from. It's not lost, but we were ripped away from. I want to reclaim that because that's more than enough for me. I just want to respect what my ancestors did. This was not these are not ground zero civilizations that were just had some sticks and stones, and then an actual civilization came around and then took them, and even though they enslaved them, the culture that the enslaved people adopted was better than their own. That wasn't the case. These people came from sophisticated cultures, and sadly, the whole debate about the transatlantic slave movement, that whole era, there's a lot of fingers to blame, with that. This is not as simple as people just getting kidnapped. This was unfortunately a horrible business, and you did have empires, you did have kingdoms that were very, very sophisticated, had standing armies, and that were involved in it. And the reason why that's important to me is because we've been told this narrative that you just had these savages that were over there, and then you had like a more advanced force that came over and like threw a net over these people and then dragged them across the ocean. That didn't happen. These were people that were bought and sold, sometimes by enemy kingdoms or enemy empires, and wars just like any other part of the world, except that no one could have known what kind of slavery was going to happen. Like when they went there. But the reason why that's so important for Afrofuturism is because chattel slavery is the first type of slavery that dehumanized people and stripped several cultures. So when you have the descendants of those people that are trying to reclaim that, they go about it in different ways. There are some people that just want to reclaim what was lost. There are some people, for me, that want to not only reclaim what's lost, but simulate what we would have been had colonialism never happened. That's the whole basis of Yohance. That's the whole basis of my brand of Afrofuturism, where I try to imagine a world that's thousands of years in the future, and because I'm a fan of Star Wars, I decided to take, let's go further than that. Like, what if they went to another universe entirely? Let's see a parallel universe where they, where that culture dominated the stars. And the reason why I came up with that is because, not necessarily trying to make a statement, but as a huge fan of Star Wars growing up, I still love Star Wars. No one really notices how this is still a white Western culture that's just been pushed into the future, and people just widely accept it as, oh, that's just futuristic. No, it's futuristic, but it's specifically white Western futuristic. And the only issue I have with that is that when you're a kid that looks like me, and you want to be Luke Skywalker, you want to be Han Solo and all that, you may identify with that character. The other kid's like, well, you don't look like Han Solo, you don't look like, and they're not being racist. They're just like, well, I don't see you that way. And that's when you become conscious of, oh, this thing that actually is beautiful is a barrier for me. That means that I don't look like heroes. I don't look like the people that I actually relate to. So that's the importance of creating a world where they have that. But then it goes further than that, because you can't just paint everybody black and say, okay, well, this is your world and this is yours. That has to, the environment has to, and Daniel can relate to this with his beautiful mask work. Just masking, because I use a lot of masks already. Just Yohance, his mask is a Fang mask from Gabon. Masking is a very intrinsic part of African culture. Indigenous culture in general, and there are different interpretations of that. Either what Daniel does, which is I guess I would say even more spiritual, because like you're really putting, it's a spiritual manifestation of who you are on your skin, which is your most personal, it's your first mask. But then there's also the physical masks that are made, either in wood or in other materials, where you're embodying, like this other spirit or something. You're becoming that thing, and these are different elements that are a huge part of Afrofuturism that just lend themselves to sci-fi. But ironically, it hasn't really been done, mainly because of this huge ignorance towards African cultures, and just saying, we're just going to focus on these cultures because these are futuristic. The last thing I'll say about that is that this misconceived notion that European or Western culture is by default the more advanced culture, and we're just calling it, like modern culture, which is a funny word. They say modern culture, but they're actually reading modern Western cultures, because it's the only culture that's been allowed to evolve. Many other cultures were halted by colonialism. Their evolution was literally stopped and then replaced by this new culture. And they have subcultures that were made from that. And I still give credit to that as well. But to lie and say, well, this is modern culture is wrong, because it doesn't necessarily fit all of us. Even aesthetically, it doesn't always fit. It doesn't represent us. Even like people think of, like, the most advanced weapon they can think of is a gun. The irony of that, and that's the reason. The irony is that it's not actually. The Western way of thinking is that. But let's just say someone came up with the idea of a shield that rendered that completely useless. Then you're going right back to what you consider to be primitive weapons, which I find ironic. So that all of a sudden the spear and the shield becomes the more advanced weapon. So it's all about a point of view, and I think that's my approach to Afrofuturism, is just trying to re-educate people into considering what other cultures would look like if they were allowed to evolve to the level of sophistication and modernity that Western culture was allowed to.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that it's sort of like, as Daniel was saying, that the term was coined by a white man, Afrofuturism, not that long ago. But when I think about how it's sort of, whatever we want to call it, has made this incredible landing currently now in our world today, the importance of this can't be lost, right? It's sort of like, we didn't, me growing up, I didn't, you had maybe a few Black comics, you had no Black children's books, right? You really didn't have the opportunity to see these other worlds and these other places and these other narratives of different people. You watched, Life About Africa on National Geographic, and I'm dating myself, I know, but I'm just saying that it's so empowering. We saw that with what Black Panther did. And I know everyone always goes back to Black Panther and talking about Black Panther, but we have to, because we have to talk about the world of Wakanda, and that was a world that people have to understand could have existed, or maybe still does exist. We don't know. It could be in the the forest of somewhere. We don't know. Let's think it is. But the fact that, you're right, Star Wars is a multi-billion-dollar story and industry that's created the way you just described it, Paul. So how important is that right now, for the next generation to see these stories, these films, what you all are creating, to be able to have the generations that come behind you also feel like, this is my future. This is where, now I understand where I can be seen. I've never been seen that way before, or seen my life that way before. But that's what I feel like the work that you're doing does. And that's what I feel like, SciFi has a way of doing that, is putting us in a different space where anything is possible, and there's a little bit more equity in that particular world. So can you guys just sort of talk to that, about what we're benefiting from the work that you're doing to bring these worlds to life in a way that's empowering to people?
I would love to talk about. Maybe Daniel has something to say first. Then
I'll say a few things, and then I would definitely love to hear, Paul, what you have to say about it. I think that the representation thing is huge. It's definitely huge. I think that's not the only thing that that's positive that's coming from this, and I think there's actually something that's even deeper and more important than just the representation. But I do believe the representation is, I mean, humongous, right? If you don't see people who are like you, coming from your lifestyle, coming from your ethnic, cultural understanding, doing certain things, it definitely does not plant the seed. In fact, it pulls up the seed of any kind of imagination of you doing that. And so, that's why things like, President Obama and that kind of representation, it's important. However, I think what's even more important and more deeply needed is a change in our way of thinking, our philosophy, which has been colonized as well. And so, I think kind of what Paul was saying in terms of like the future, what do we think the future looks like? How is it that, and I think Star Wars has actually started to do a lot of work around this, and I applaud them for that, although they're very late. But what is the future? How is the future possible where the majority of the people are white? When you think about actual science, right? If we're talking about science fiction here, the actual population of the Earth is majority people of color, and it's only going to be more so the more time passes. So the idea that a world in the future could be so bereft of diversity is not just, you're not just saying that, this is my perspective. You're saying you are actively denying the existence of the majority of the population of this earth, which is wrong. And so, that's not only that, but in terms of, what Paul was saying in terms of technology, when he was talking about sort of the gun and the spear, we need to change our whole idea of what technology is and what it's for. And I think, there's this amazing book by Maladome Somé that is about the African art of healing and the wisdom of Africa. And one thing that he's from the Dagara people, and one thing he talked about was that technology in his tribe, in his culture, is used to better people, whereas I think the technology in modern Western world is not so much geared towards that anymore. It's geared towards either creating economy. It's geared towards making work more efficient. It's geared towards power and control. The greatest technological sort of innovation is coming from our military, and it always has been. And so, when you think about the actual role of technology, it should change your whole concept of what technology should look like and do. Technology can be paint that you just apply to your skin. It doesn't have to be a machine, right? It doesn't have to be inhuman in order to, in fact, it's almost kind of a misnomer to think of technology as being inhuman in order for it to really do anything for humanity. And so, I think the bigger thing here is changing how we're seeing things. And the only way you can do that is to allow other cultures to express and show their knowledge and their wisdom. And I'm not like trying to dog Western society here. It's more just, we need that diversity in order for us to really understand what needs to be done. And so like creating that space for other cultures and their wisdom is really important. That's actually what Star Wars was trying to do as well. There's a whole lot of a Japanese philosophy in Star Wars. There's a whole lot of African philosophy in Star Wars. He may not have known it at the time, but all that stuff is in there, and that's what makes it powerful. So that's, I would say that.
And it's interesting, Daniel, because you said, that you said the words need diversity, and it's sort of like, it's not about saying and needing diversity. It is. Like you said, this is who the world is made up of. It's just represent that diversity. Just represent who the world is and bring that world into the future, so that we can understand and feel confident and comfortable that this is where we belong. We belong here. We've always been here. We've always been part of creating and building a country. We're going to be part of building and creating that future. And this is what we see in that future.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I like to, it's hard to talking back to that, because Daniel, you just like brought the house down with that, and that was
Yeah,
that was,
I know.
that was absolutely incredible, and I'm really so many points that I've wanted people to hear, and to hear it come from somebody else, is in that much detail is just so validating, and I'm really I really appreciate that, because one of my biggest influences, people don't realize how much research went into Yohance. When I first released it, people were like, oh, the images are really pretty, but there was 7 years of research that got to that point. And part of it was, and this is my only issue I had with probably with Black Panther, when so I came with Yohance back in 2014, actually. So this is before the Black Panther movie came out. And the idea, and I'd been ruminating on this idea for a while, but I had no idea how to approach it. Because my issue is that when I'd seen other people attempt to do something like this, it was usually where they would take what they considered to be a primal cultural totem or some type of cloth or design or something from our culture, and then slap it on what we established as what everyone has accepted as modern futuristic technology, but it's actually just Western culture, and then try to like Mod Podge the two together. And it always seems very convoluted. It just overly the juxtaposition just did not work. They're clashing with each other. The energies were not working, just visually, artistically, it was just not balanced out. And more importantly, when you put that next to something like Iron Man, you're like, okay, look, I know that you're telling me that technically this is more advanced, but come on. I mean, we know Iron Man is way more advanced than that. I mean, I'm literally seeing like the nanite technology, and I'm seeing like how I'm seeing the engineering that goes in it. You're not going to tell me this is more advanced. I said, no, it's because you don't understand it yet. On paper, that works. I'm not saying you're wrong, but you have to understand that in order to show that. That's where my 7 years of research came into it, because it's very easy to say, that face painting is actually is a complex form of technology. Also, people are like, I want to believe you, but how is that? Like, how does that work? And then you have to go into detail, and you have to explain to them the approach of your studying, your research of how you went to that. And I'm pretty sure that Daniel's smiling at this, so because pretty sure he's had this conversation with a lot of people. We're like, oh, it's face painting. He's like, no, this is not face painting. This is not face painting. One of the first things I had to learn when I was when I decided to go on this. I remember I was 18 years old in West Africa at the time. We had moved there for a year. I was in Burkina Faso, and that was when I pretty much began on this journey of how I wanted to use African mythology and culture and reshape it in a way to inform the diaspora of a new identity, in order to go forward. Because the problem I had as someone that's of the diaspora, both of West Indian descent and then also of African American descent, to have that one common thing I kept seeing is that as beautiful as my cultures are, they're subcultures. And when I mean subculture, I don't mean in terms of inferiority. I mean that there are cultures that were made, by default, and in the periphery of another established Western culture, because they weren't allowed to have their African culture brought with them. What happened is that they had to make this new culture, like in spite of that. So as far as ingenuity goes, it's incredible, and we celebrate that to this day. But going forward, that's not. We have to go back to the proper foundation. It doesn't make a proper foundation. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but the point I'm trying to make here is that wasn't enough for me. So how do you do that? Well, we have to go back to the pre-colonial roots, find out, understand the African culture that we specifically come from, and then understand the algorithms and and just the complexity of what's going on with the designs. Extract that and then simulate a new culture that you're mixing together the same way that we were mixed together. And then from there, that's your seed. That's your foundation. You can then build this new culture of this new era that we are in, because the reality is that even though we're in the diaspora, we're no longer just African now. Like now we're that's the part of the diaspora. We can't it's not simple just going back to Africa. There's been so many mixtures that have gone into that since then. So you have to create this new culture, but that doesn't mean that it can have its foundation on pure Africa. So that was my whole approach to it. And the first thing I had to understand was Well, I know that I keep hearing about, these advanced civilizations, but I'm not seeing it. And that was when I attended back in 2008 a seminar. I think it was Ron Gillash, where he on fractals and African fractals, and this was a mind blowing experience for him, because he showed how African culture, and you can actually really see it in Daniel's work, how African culture had an intrinsic understanding of fractal theory, which is a mathematical phenomenon that we use to this very day. From anything from microchips to satellites, we use fractal technology everywhere. As a matter of fact, fractal technology, which the godfather of that was Benom Mandelbrot. He pretty much almost ushered in the new age when he brought fractal technology to the scientific community, and understanding how to organize information by understanding how nature already organized itself. So ancient Africans understood this complex theory just by studying nature and having that connection with nature, and then understanding how to then extract that and then reformat that. So they're still being one with nature, but they're also understanding how to turn that into technology. So even a lot of when it comes to divination or healing or all these different things you keep seeing, from you see for the West, we see random dots and lines. We'll see like certain lines or colors. This is very deliberate, because why is it that it's easy for Western culture to accept acupuncture, from Eastern philosophies, but not accept fractal technology in African art. You have so many people, so many Westerners collecting African art and like, oh, I like the primal aspect of it. I'm like, this is not primal. This is from the 1800s. But because in your eyes you're thinking that it doesn't match up to what Western culture was at in the 1800s, you threw out the possibility that the same amount of time and development for that piece of art is the same. Like, for instance, they'll look at I don't know, like a clock or a stopwatch from 1911, and they'll say, this is like hundreds of years of engineering and design that came to this particular clock, this is a work of art. This is showing how European technology has evolved to this particular point. Is going back all the way to the Middle Ages. They'll look at a mask, for instance, or a piece of art, or like a Benin bronze plaque that's from the exact same era. And because it looks primitive to them, they're assuming, well, yes, we found it in 1911 as well, but it's on par with something that would have been done in the Middle Ages. And when you do that, you're completely ignoring what exactly the purpose of that is. The Africans have connected art with technology. And one of the things that people didn't realize when they first look at the Benin plaques was that Africans had found a way to create 3D space and 2D space, which was monumental. No one ever thought about that. That was actually the birth of the Cubism movement. That's how Picasso studied, like in hieratic scale, all these different things that you get from studying African art. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what you can get. So I had to study this for 7 years before I even could attempt to think of what I could do for Yohance. And when I did that, I first did the poster first to think this is what it would look like. Because I wanted to look as if all that science, that technology, that research had been used and respected by this other civilization, or other civilizations plural, and then simulated 1,000 years. What would that culture look like? Would I be able to take that culture and put it next to the Avengers, or put it next to Darth Vader, or any of these other cultures, and would it look like they're on par technologically? And so when I finally was able to do that, it was validating to show how much work we have to do to get to that point. Not because our ancestors didn't do that, but because of how removed we are from our ancestors and how much we don't understand them. So you have to decolonize people's point of view of approaching Africa, or African cultures plural, with this simplicity that these are just primal, the first primal gurgitations of first man, and not the complex layered cultures that they actually are, because then you'll approach them, you start to extract certain nuggets they can then use for future civilizations.
Can I just piggyback real quick on what you just said, just because that amount of work, yeah, we don't see that in most of the what we call Afrofuturistic works that are coming out today, and they feel awkward. And some of that awkwardness is just a product of us. We're in this process. Like, it's like we're learning to dance. We're gonna be a little awkward at the beginning, but part of it is also that, like, that depth is so necessary, because that 7 years that you put in, I saw immediately upon the first frame of watching your trailer. And it's like, as audience members, as consumers of this stuff, we know it when we see it, like, and there's a certain feeling that it creates in us when we see it. And when I saw that, I said, yes, like this is right, like, and I can't say that I say that all the time when I'm seeing the Afrofuturist work that's creating now. One, because it's a trend now, people are trying to just jump on. But two, it's because people have not been able to, and it's not always their fault, they're working with what they have not been able to do that deep dive to really get an understanding of what this essence is. But it's so important to do that, because the effect that it has is so much richer when that's done.
Sorry, I just need to piggyback on that too, because you just brought up something that is very important to underline as well. And I really don't want to be misunderstood as if, like, I'm knocking people that have not been able to do that kind of research, because that is the beauty of the diaspora as well. You have people, and this is a direct image of what our ancestors went through, where they don't have access to those African sources the same way. I mean, now we have the internet, so it's easier, but you have some people where they don't have that. So their version of Afrofuturism, of that self-exploration, that work in process, is purely going to come from a genetic point of view. It's going to come from them understanding what they understand and when they're their culture. That is still Afrofuturism. I do not want to discredit that in any kind of way. I think that's why when people keep throwing this world around, they're not understanding the complexity. I know I keep using that word a lot, but there's no other way to describe it. There's a nuanced complexity that comes with the word Afrofuturism, because just African culture and general diaspora is nuanced. It may seem jumbled together, like you're looking at Jarvis's mind, but that's what you're dealing with when you take all these cultures and you mash them together and you try to dehumanize them. And then they find a way to reinvent themselves. Then you crush them again. They reinvent themselves. They have to find a way to then connect that with the African culture form. It's insane. So you're going to get different iterations of that. In a way, it's like this birth of ideas that's overflowing right now, which is very exciting at this time. And the thing, when that was apparent to me, and this was mind opening for me. Like, I have my 4-year-old son. I made Yohance a year before he was born. So by the time that as far as the comic was concerned, so by the time that he was that he was born, he already had all this imagery around him. He was seeing this stuff. My 4-year-old son, to this day, you cannot tell him that Yohance is not an actual brand out there. I've literally tried to explain to him that I can't go to a store and buy a Yohance action figure. He does not believe me. Like, he's saying no. Like, he loves the trailer. He's like, when's the movie coming out? Because for him, it's an actual trailer. I've shown him Star Wars. He's like, yeah, it's all right. I kind of like that, but yeah, I want more Yohance. He's 4 years old. He's very opinionated about what he wants. Now, of course, as a dad, I might feel very biased and like, well, okay, yeah, that's my son. He likes the stuff that dad does. But before I was curious, like, what is it about that he likes? And he says, because he looks like me. Now, a 4-year-old telling me this, and that's, so I'm like, wow, at such an early age, this is the importance of what it has. And then I showed him other, and I was just curious of the scientific experiment. I showed him other sci-fi where you had black protagonists, but it wasn't necessarily Afrofuturism. It was just like a black protagonist in the future. And he liked it too, but he just didn't respond the same way. And like, he really gravitated to, the use of the spear and the shield and, the African mask they use. Like, he really gravitated to that. And I realized that these things are in our DNA. It's in our subconscious already. We don't have to put words on it, but it's already in our subconscious. Doesn't matter how black you may feel or how much that heritage is in you, you resonate to these certain things. So when he saw that, it's connecting with him on all these different levels, and he's just experiencing it, and he's just explaining what he's experiencing and saying, yeah, I connect to it. I like it. This is I really like it, and that showed me the importance of having something like that, not just showing a black face, but showing something that has that studied heritage and foundation and the DNA all in the fiber of its being of African culture, because people are going to resonate to that. And when they are, it's going to inform their identity. My son is going to grow up knowing who he is. He appreciates, he likes Frozen too. Like he likes seeing, he likes seeing Disney and all this other stuff. No, he likes this stuff, but the thing that really resonates with him, that he sees, yeah, this is me. This is who I can see myself becoming, that he's mapping himself to, happens to be Yohance. And I would venture that it's not just because Yohance. If there was someone else that did something like that, or even better than that, which I sincerely hope is going to happen in the near future, because you don't want to be alone. You need an ecosystem, and I'm starting to see that pop up, which I'm very happy about. He would gravitate to that as well. It's not because of me. It's because of it. Actually goes to show the complete lack of this desert out there of imagery that we have for, and it's not just because he's young. It could be, I've seen 30 and 40-year-old black men and women that respond the exact same way. And they're like, I met a guy like who marched with Martin Luther King, and he was saying that my entire life I've never seen something that resonated with me, and that I didn't know this was possible, and that brought me to tears, because I'm like, I wasn't trying to get something that deep. I was just trying to create something that I was selfish, actually. I wanted to do for myself. I wanted to, because I was just tired of liking a franchise, Star Wars, so much without being able to relate to it,
Well, yeah, you wanted to create something. You wanted to create something that you could see yourself in, and I think that everything that you're talking about is so, just goes back to what we were talking about before, is like creating these cultures and creating these empowering characters. And like Daniel said, like just seeing that opening frame and realizing, wow, like, and not, it's like the lighting, it's like what you used in your animation for color, and it's just, and I think that, as you said, people are going to resonate, and it's not just kids that are going to resonate to it. You said so many, both of you have said so many incredible things, and you were talking, Paul, about different iterations that of Afrofutures, and it's true, because we're not a monolith, right? And we're not a monolith here in the present. We weren't in the past, and we're not going to be in the future. And we want to make sure that people understand that, and that doing work like these, space operas are a great way for people to understand that you, even if you aren't this one character, you could be this other character, and you could be this other character, but there's a space and a place for you in this world, where you can feel, empowered and excited about being part of that world. I know we don't have that much time left, but I do want to talk about, Paul, you had talked about that space operas are only work if they're tangible. And I think you've touched a lot on that, about making Yohance tangible, the work that you do to create these characters. And they're not characters. I don't feel like they're characters. I feel like they're real people. They're like, that's who I'm going to meet in my future, right? They're not. So can you just talk a little bit about that? And I think that, Daniel, too, that your work also in mask, and the mask work you do, is creating a tangibleness which is why your sons, for Paul, why your sons, want so much to have that action figure, because you've made your work tangible. How important is that for the work that you're doing, to be able to appeal across everybody, for everyone?
Before I respond to that, there's a small anecdote that, and I think that Daniel relates to this too. There's I remember back at the Afropunk Festival, the first one in Brooklyn, and there's an artist that was performing called Young Paris. I don't know if everyone's familiar with him, but he's a Congolese artist, and he has it's a very interesting performance, because It's him and his brother and a few other background dancers, and they did the painting themselves, like in the body painting. And I remember I was backstage, I'm hanging out with them, and his brother, like he saw the stuff that I did with Yohance. He's like, "Oh, this is awesome, man, this is great." So he said, "Yeah, would you like to do something to paint for me?" I'm like, "Oh, of course, yeah, I'm trying to do it." And the young Paris comes in and respectfully say, "No, you can't do this." I'm like, and that's when I realized that no, these are not just markings. There's a spiritual connect. There's a deliberation with every single thing that goes on there. Now, as embarrassed as I felt at the time, it was a very, very learning moment for me, because I realized that even as much work that I did, I was not respecting African culture enough to understand that there are certain things you just don't do. You know, you can't just put random dots on your face and then say, "Oh, this is African," or explore. You can't just put random lines on your face and say, "Oh, I'm exploring my African culture." It's not that. It's not. You can't just do that. These are lines that are connected to spiritual energies, directly to your ancestors, going back, thousands of years. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, going back to your saying about being tangible, that was the first moment that I understood how Africa and African art has to be tangible. And I understand now tying to what you said about space opera, I already had that knowledge of what was supposed to be tangible, with African culture. But then I started to try and apply that philosophy to everything else I was encountering. And I was wondering, why is it that there's so many times, why is it Star Wars is the holy grail of space opera, when we have had almost every other iteration possible? I mean, we've had Battlestar Galactica, we've had, Star Trek to a degree. It's not really space opera, but I mean, you had like Flash Gordon, I mean, even Dune to a degree. I mean, everyone has their own brand of what they consider, different types of space opera. I mean, just the festival alone, I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing a good third of them are excellent space operas too. It's a genre that keeps expanding itself, like the universe itself, no pun intended. But what is it about Star Wars that has people coming back generation to generation? And it's that tactile energy of it. When you see the Millennium Falcon, you can feel the rivets on it. You can feel the dirt and the grime. I mean, let's be honest. Han Solo is as much as I love Han Solo, the man is filthy. I mean, considering how the Millennium Falcon looked in Solo, when Lando had it, and then considering how, I don't know what Han did with it, in 20 years, but it looks disgusting, like 20 years later. But the irony of it is that we like that, because it feels like it's been lived in. We like that grit. We like feeling it's tangible. And too many times, but then also, and for me, I also enjoyed the prequels as well. The first generation, they didn't really like it as much because they had their own vision of this used, lived in Star Wars. They were showing like this brand spanking new shiny Star Wars with all these other worlds, and they can't really compute. So I was like, well, no, but this works too. Because then you're seeing the artistry that goes in, you're seeing all these other cultures that are manifesting themselves at their prime, and I'm seeing this universe that's there. So that's what I was starting to ask myself. Okay, I need to research this. What is it that's making Star Wars stick out that much? And that was when I started realizing how much design work and research went into creating the individual cultures. So, and this is more prevalent in the prequels than in the originals, but just when you're seeing, I don't know if there's any Star Wars fans, but you see like the Neimoidians, and the, which is the Trade Federation, and the work that went behind there. There was, even when they had in the headdresses, or some of these are African headdresses that they had, that they mapped it from. And even the Zabraks or Darth Maul, his character, like those markings are directly from Kabuki mask, and having these different cultures manifest themselves, but those cultures are bringing all their history with them. You can take an image from something and think you're just taking an image, but you're taking all the history that goes along with it. And those histories have tactile energy in them. They resonate with the human eye. So when you're taking something from African culture, like a mask or something, and you're reimagining it, you may think that you're just taking like a stylistic nod to that culture, but the thing is that mask that you took that from had a purpose when it was designed. A perfect example is Yohance's mask, which I said it was a Fang mask from Gabon. If you took the original mask and you took Yohance's mask, you'll see they are different, but the Fang mask was created with this tangible mindset in place, where people are going to be holding this thing. They're going to be connecting with it. I want them to understand the form. You know, this African sculpture is very, very personal. You have to interact with it. So in the colors that you're using, the abstract nature of the colors, all these are getting your eyes to feel the subject. Either the colors that you're using, you're getting them to connect tangibly with whatever the subject is that you're trying to connect them to, because you don't want them to just see an object. You want them to connect with this on a you know, subconscious level. So that's what that mask was already bringing. So I'm taking that mask and then I'm making it in a futuristic, redoing it in a futuristic kind of way. So in the end, what you have is something that looks completely unique, but at the same time has all that history in the DNA. It's like it's very subtle. It's all the way in there. So it's not in your face. I think one of the issues, and I'm not trying to dog anyone here, but I mean I have to use a bad example here. Like for instance, in Black Panther, when you see Shuri's design, one of the things that irritated me the most is having a mudcloth skirt, and then you have it on top of, I guess, like the Avengers type sort of looking like pants. And the issue I had with that was because I know a lot of people that worked on the film design wise, and they had some incredible designs that were put in there. Some of them were left on the floor, and then some of them were, and some of them that were not good were in place. This is an example of one that shouldn't have been there. Because a perfect example of people taking something that had nothing to do with each other and then juxtaposing on top of each other and say, oh, this is Afrofuturism. No, it's not. It's like you might as well, you know, put a Scottish kilt on a Maasai sword. It doesn't work together. There's no design thought that goes with it. And you might try to find a story to explain it, saying, oh, well, this was passed down by your ancestors and she has this. It's because in your mind, you don't realize it, but you're thinking that futurism equals Western civilization, Western technology. Because the only technology that you know. And Africa equals, you know, like the some folk piece of mudcloth that I got in a village somewhere. And you're trying to put those together. And you're not understanding that what you're seeing as Western technology is Western civilization that's allowed to evolve to that point. So that's the only form of technology that we have access to. And therefore that's the uniform definition of technology. And African culture the post-colonial African culture that you're exposed to is what's left of what colonialism destroyed. So you're looking at two very different levels here. So in order for you to really get something that's Afrofuturist, you have to ignore the Western technology that you live in. I'm not saying it's bad, because obviously I live and I love it myself, but just for diversity's sake, you know, ignore that. Go back to pre-colonial Africa, understand what they had to offer, understand what they had done. Because again, these cultures before colonialism, they were not new cultures. These are cultures that existed for hundreds of years before that, you know, in some cases even thousands of years. What do you think happens during that time? A lot of innovations. You know, when they got to that point, they were at their zenith when this happened. So go back to that, understand what they had to offer, and then you simulate that. And you say, okay, what would have happened if they had made it into, you know, the 1800s or the 1900s or the year 2000? What would have happened if they were able to do that without colonialism happening, just based off their own sciences? And before you know it, you have this alien world that starts to manifest itself in front of you. And then you start, but this alien world seems familiar because you share the same DNA with it. Then you want to simulate it even further, and that's where that comes from.
Wow. I mean, I think that's that goes back to a whole conversation that we could have another hour on, is the responsibility of telling the truth in the future, right? What is your responsibility as a creator? You know, whether it's film, whether it's art, whether it's whatever, that your responsibility to do that homework. So I want to sort of close out by talking about, you know, for the both of you, in thinking about responsibility and thinking about your work and thinking about what your hopes are for, you know, what your work will do, will inspire, will educate, because it will do all that. But I'd love to hear about, you know, what the rest of your journey is. We know that Yohance is right now a trailer. You're working for it to be a feature film. Everyone is probably very excited and wants to hear.
in addition to your 4-year-old, like when can I go see it and when can I buy the action figures? So just to let us know a little bit about that and what you want us to take away from it, and then Daniel will hear from you too, sort of about your work as well. So.
Well, first again, I'm really flattered and honored by the response. Just even from you guys, and then from also anyone that because when I first people need to understand Yohance was an experiment at first. It was not meant to. At first, I was working on the pack. Which is another huge journey, which I'm very proud to, which is still in process. But the pack was kind of like my Lord of the Rings. That was my, like me taking African culture and creating a fantasy pre-colonial world, and then simulating, what that world would look like. But the idea of going to the future was so novel to me, and I was afraid of it, that I had to test it out first, and then that test worked, and then it further got to this point. So to answer your question, where that journey, the next step is, yeah, it's a trailer now, and I've been working. We're actually gonna be showing the opening sequence at the festival, so I'm excited. I literally was working on that up until 2 a.m. last night, just getting some assets done. That's the reason why when I woke up this morning, I had to rush to get everything ready for this interview. But I actually had to hide some stuff in the office, the studio, because there's some models and maquettes that are tied to that you guys can't see off screen. So I'm actively working on it, actively trying to get this thing done. And it can go two ways at this point. The one thing for sure is that the film's going to get made, because I'm still working on it. And I think that's the huge benefit of being in 2020. Like, I'm doing this on Blender, which is it's an open, I'm sure Daniel's really familiar with it. A lot of people are familiar with it. It's an open source software. It's completely free. And it's a very powerful software. If it was not for that, I would not have been able to make those images that you see right there, because for so long, this has been, this has been privatized, unless you have like a multi-million-dollar studio behind you, you can't make stuff like this, live action or animation. So finally having these tools to be able to democratize it allows me to work on it while I'm still trying to get the film distributed. So as far as distribution, there's like this weird silver lining to this really dark cloud that has been coronavirus. There was a personal tragedy for me involved. My father, who was a huge driving force, inspiration for Yohance. He's one that introduced African culture. We kept talking about the opening day. He passed away during coronavirus, actually, in August. That was literally 2 weeks before I released the trailer, and it was devastating for me. Also, at the time, we were going through a personal tragedy. Like, my business had completely shattered, because this isn't something that I can live off of yet, unfortunately. I had to have another assignment. That completely shattered on coronavirus. My family and I were about to get evicted, like in the middle of the pandemic. And I'm like, all these walls crashing in. The last thing I was thinking about was the trailer. I'm like, I forget it. It's done. I just want to survive right now. And I was so bitter, what happened. And then financially, I was able to get out of that, almost miraculously. But then my father's voice came to me. I'm thinking, and he kept telling me, he kept telling me all these stories where he had to keep going and keep pressing. He said, it'll sort itself out. Keep doing it. That was the voice I had in my head when I was editing the last 2 weeks to get the trailer done. I released the trailer, and then but the reason why that had to happen for the trailer is because I still have those words right now. I don't have a distributor yet for Yohance. I don't have, I want it to be in theaters around the world. I want it to be in streaming around the world. But coronavirus, weirdly enough, has pushed streaming services to the front, as opposed to movies, to movie theaters. And as sad as I am for the movie theaters, in a weird way, it's actually kind of good for the indie filmmaker, because now it kind of democratizes getting our movies out on the same platforms that the big movies are on. It is nearly impossible for you as an indie filmmaker to get a multinational movie theater run. It's nearly impossible without you having to sell off all your rights, without you not even touching it. Because we all know the nitty gritty of how the movie industry works. And streaming, it's this Netflix phenomenon has ushered in this new way of distribution that's much more friendly to the independent creator and allows people to have the same level of quality of distribution. So to answer your question, we are trying to pitch to Netflix, to a few other streamers as well. through aggregators. But worst case scenario, if they pass on that, I'm still putting this movie out. I don't care how, but it's still going to be out there because people need to see it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that you will have no problem. And if you do it yourself, then you do it yourself. And I'm sure that as you create it and work on it and bring it to an end, that your dad will certainly play a role in. So we can't wait to see his character and the way you've honored his character in this film.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
That's amazing. Amazing. So Daniel, did you want to talk a little? Just, we have very little time, and then I'm going to come back to Paul to end up for Yohance, but to sort of like talk about your journey too, and not just with Come On In, but with the masking and storytelling and the importance of the work that you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll be brief. I definitely first want to send my condolences to Paul for your loss. But it's amazing that, your father is very much still present. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that my work, so just to give a brief definition of the mask work, because I know we've been referencing it, but I'm sure people are like, what is it? What are they talking about? Masking is derived from body decoration practices and traditions that are found all around the world by indigenous people. But especially from the African continent. And a mask is, I spell it differently. I spell it M-A-S-S-Q instead of M-A-S-K. And the reason for that is because we usually think of masks, and the moment we're in now is so apropos. When we think of masks, we think of something that covers our face, that may hide our identity and that we may hide behind, either for protection or to distinguish or to assume the identity of someone else, right? When we think of masks. And so what I try to do is I actually try to use paint, and I paint directly on the face. And I try to use that to, rather than conceal, reveal aspects of ourselves and to bring what's inside out. And so it's sort of flipping the notion of what a mask is. And so I spell it differently. But again, it is derived from indigenous practices of body decoration. I have definitely had to do a lot of my own research as well in terms of figuring out the complexity of that. And also to sort of figure out, not so much trying to recreate what has already been done or to appropriate what has already been done, which really what it would entail, to try to find that authentic link that I have in myself that Paul was talking about, that's in my blood, the link to that sort of tradition within me, within the ancestors that I am attached to, even despite the severance that happened, and trying to be authentic to that feeling. And I think when you are authentic to that, what you create is people instantly connect to it, kind of like what Paul was saying. So, and not just people who look like me. I'm constantly approached by people who are from very different cultures who just feel a certain connection to the work. And I think that's testament to being honest to that, what makes us human and what's in the core of all of us, because Africa is the birthplace of humanity. So Come On In is a feature-length film that's really about sort of Black mental health/illness of artists. It's a narrative film about an artist who's slowly losing their mind and the process of them trying to find it again. And the masking actually is a part of that. So it was a way for me to bring my masking into motion. And I'm also working on a documentary right now on the dual effects of the COVID pandemic and structural racism on Black and brown communities in Boston. It's called The Color of Corona. If you go to thecolorofcorona.com, you will see more information about it, but that is kind of what's keeping me busy. And all of these things are about trying to champion the resiliency of human beings, especially of people from the diaspora. And again, trying to reclaim that humanity, that art, that culture, that love, that wonder and power that we have.
Thank you. I just want to thank both Paul and Daniel for this was an incredible conversation. I feel like we could be talking for it's like a course. I mean, this should just be a whole course between the two of you talking about what you talked. I have so many notes. I have so many other things. Like there are just so many things to unpack and to undo, and well, definitely to undo, especially in this world. And in the future world, we might not have to do so much undoing. But I think that all of us at SciFi just really want to say thank you. And Paul, we are so looking forward to your finished product, your incredible film. Maybe it'll be ready for Rock's film in
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I definitely want to.
We'll take it June 2022 because we partner with SciFi. We're great partners. We could do some really big, huge thing around this, because the work that you're doing, the passion, the perseverance, the understanding of educating yourself and others, I think for Black people is so important. And I just want to applaud you for the work that you're doing, the work that you've put into this, and just really look forward to what we have, what you have coming up, in addition to the Yohance series. So I don't know if you have any last words you want to say to us around this particular film, but please do.
Well, I'm at this point now where I'm like in my third trimester of this thing. I'm just trying to. I've been nourished at this point. I'm glad the thing hasn't died. I'm just so happy for it, and I've grown more attached to it. But also in a way, I've grown detached to it, in the healthy way, because I've actually had to restructure this project almost 100% halfway through it. I mean, I came with this. I launched the Kickstarter for the Indiegogo for this back in 2016. That was 4 years ago. And in 2018, I thought I was going to have a trailer at that time, but the trailer I had at that time was just not what I wanted. I actually had to redo everything from scratch because I was still researching during that time. So I guess I'm definitely going to be looking for different festivals, to put it in as soon as I can, but I'm just eager to get this thing out. I want to show people. I'm really curious to see what the impact is going to have, not for vain reasons, but just I'm really curious how people are going to resonate to it, either negatively or positively, and see how that's going to hopefully inspire them to then explore what African culture can do, in the future. So yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you guys again.
Thank you so much. I just want to say I'm incredibly honored and humbled to have been able to be a part of this conversation and listen. And it was exactly what our festival strives to do very often. And we find ourselves a lot in a situation where we are searching for voices exactly like yours. And sometimes they're hard to find in this area. And it's not because they aren't there. It's because we need to find them. And they need the space and the opportunity to be heard. And we are so grateful to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and your perspectives. And we are so grateful. So thank you so much for today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time.
Yes. And thank you, Lisa. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. You guys did a terrific job.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the space.